watching the entire MCU catalog before Avengers Doomsday drops. I'm breaking down how each movie and show holds up, what actually matters to the larger MCU, and whether it's worth the rewatch. Doomsday is coming. Let's prepare. This is Doomsday Prepping.
Happy New Year!
Remember 2008? Assuming you were even alive in 2008. But if you've reached Unk status like me, then you'll also remember a time before the MCU existed, when movies were just movies. Something you watched and enjoyed with no big expectations of tie-ins, cameos, or forgotten post-credit scenes.
Star Fox of Mystery Planet.
What a pleasure.
Movies didn't have universes, they just had, this. When I was a kid, Spider-Man was one of my favorite movies of all time. It was like my life. And it was its own self-contained thing. We were just happy to get sequels if the movie was good enough. When Marvel Studios made Iron Man, they weren't expecting to change like literally the entire movie industry and affect how movies are made and how franchises are built. But they did. So we're going to talk about how. But before we can discuss this movie, let's take a journey together to the 90s.
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
Remember the 90s? Now, first and foremost, we have to remember that Marvel Studios is a comic book company. Remember comics? Remember paper? In 1996, the comic book industry collapsed. Why? A video for another time, maybe? But Marvel was cooked.
You're done.
They were a private company, and they didn't have a big corporate sugar daddy like DC did.
Money, please.
In order to save themselves, they had to sell off the rights to many of their characters. Spider-Man, the Hulk, the X-Men, just all of the cool ones that everyone likes. These film studios knew which characters were actually popular, and they cherry-picked the ones they knew would be successful. In fact, Sony literally had the option to buy the entire Marvel roster for only $25 million, but they chose to only buy Spider-Man for $7 million because they said nobody gives a shit about the other Marvel characters.
Shazam!
A big loss for Sony, but a big win for literally everyone else.
How would you know if you could climb a wall if you've never tried?
Flash forward to the early 2000s, and now Marvel Studios is seeing the huge success of all of these movies for the characters that they just owned. So they think, hey, we could do that, and set off to make their first self-produced film with the characters that they had left. Wait, who do we have left? The guy that loves America, talking tree. Yeah, let's go with the robot guy. Now, I know what you're thinking. These are the Avengers, like the Avengers. Marvel Studios still had most of the rights to these iconic characters. But as a kid of the 90s and the early 2000s, I can tell you, the Avengers were not it. The Justice League was the iconic superhero team during that time, thanks to DC's impressive animated universe. So yeah, without being able to rely on Avengers nostalgia, they picked Iron Man as their singular starting character. If you look it up online, there's lots of different reasons why people say Iron Man was chosen to be their first movie. I read somewhere that it was because they thought Iron Man would sell the most toys. That's the reason I like to believe, because I think it makes the most sense. If not for the toys specifically, Iron Man just seems like the most grounded character to appeal to audiences. You can almost forget that he's a comic book character and just watch this as like an action movie. The premise is a rich guy builds a robot suit that's not that hard to explain to your mom. So the movie was greenlit. All Marvel Studios had to do was take out a small loan of $525 million and put up all of their characters as collateral. No big deal.
We'll be fine.
Iron Man wasn't just a movie at this point. It was a Hail Mary. This movie had to work. Marvel Studios as a company was counting on it. So who do you get to direct and star in the most important movie that you'll ever make? The guy who directed Elf. Yeah, that's right. Elf. And, Zathura.
If this is some weird kind of joke you guys are trying to pull, you're dead.
Don't get me wrong, Elf was a huge success, but by no means a big budget action movie. And Zathura, well, I thought it was cool when I was 12.
Looks like you got a pretty serious organ problem.
Okay, well, director aside, as long as we can get a top tier movie star, then we'll be okay. Why don't we get, this guy who literally just got out of prison. No, seriously, Robert Downey Jr. was in prison like a few years earlier for drug and weapon charges.
But that's not heroic.
Yeah, what the heck was going on over here? Luckily, there was one guy overseeing the project who had a vision, a dream of what a Marvel movie universe could look like. Ladies and gentlemen, that goat, Kevin Feige. Or Feige. Apparently, Kevin Feige was just a huge Marvel nerd. He studied film and was like an assistant, I guess, in this movie.
In a city where anything can happen, it will.
But his first big movie role was an associate producer for the 2000 X-Men movie. And then he had a hand in literally every single Marvel movie of that time, regardless of the company that owned the rights. Fortunately, he was promoted to Marvel Studios president of production in 2007, 1 year before Iron Man was made. Promotion! And he was the one that realized, hey, wait, we still have the rights to the Avengers, right? So even though their popularity had died, they were still Marvel's flagship team, Marvel's Justice League. So Kevin Feige was the guy that saw past Iron Man and into the future. He saw what these movies could be, a cinematic universe, which is why he staked so much on this first project. If they failed, it meant losing everything.
Hey, what was that?
You're gonna make a lot of money together.
So Kevin apparently knew what he was doing when he put this group together. I mean, the results speak for themselves. But at that time, it seemed strange. Even the production on the film was wild. Jeff Bridges had said in an interview that the script was constantly being changed, and many of the lines were improvised.
And we really reworked the script the day before. The Marvel folks said, oh, no, this can't be the way it is. And we had to write the scenes that we were doing that day just that morning.
I think Jon Favreau's comedic background probably saved the film, because anytime Marvel Studios wanted something changed, he would just roll with the punches.
They were so lucky to have Jon Favreau as our director.
I mean, just look at the tone of this film and compare it to another superhero movie that came out the same year. You may have heard of it, a small little film called The Dark Knight.
I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
Marvel was clearly going in a much different direction with their more tongue-in-cheek humor.
This is a flight stabilizer. It's completely harmless.
And, lighthearted characters. This is where the MCU witty banter was born.
Your eyes are red. A few tears for your long-lost boss?
Tears of joy. I hate job hunting.
So now, the stage is finally set. All the pieces are on the board. So, let's watch Iron Man. Well, obviously, I can't play the entire movie on YouTube because, So instead, I'll do a quick recap, and obviously spoilers if you haven't seen this movie. Also, one more quick thing. If you're enjoying this video at all, then please consider liking and subscribing. It helps the algorithm push the video so that nerds like you can find it, and so that nerds like me can keep making videos. So the movie starts, and we see this guy named Tony Stark, and he's being escorted by some soldiers in Afghanistan. He seems pretty chill and charismatic and loves to bring up the fact that he's a womanizer any chance he can get.
Good God, you're a woman.
But then suddenly, to the surprise of absolutely no one, the Hummer gets attacked and things start blowing up everywhere, and there's lots of cool explosions. The soldiers die defending Tony. Tony tries to make a break for it, but then he gets hit by one of his own missiles. Iconic shot. And he passes out. Now we go back in time to a few days earlier, and Tony's just being a cool guy and doing all the things cool guys like to do. Gambling, picking up chicks, making silly jokes with your pals.
I don't blow on honey bear. I don't blow on hands. There it is.
Hey, I think that's the guy from Snow Dogs. But more importantly, we get a lot of exposition to learn that he's a Nepo baby. And also, he's a super genius, and he manufactures weapons. He inherited this company from his father, but this guy named Obadiah was running it for him until he turned 18, and now it's his turn. So Tony's leaving this casino, and then a cute reporter lady tries to attack Tony with the power of the press. But he attacks her instead with the power of having a lot of money. Oh yeah! So she wakes up in his cool mansion and tries to touch his thermostat, so she immediately gets kicked out by his attractive assistant.
I do anything and everything that Mr. Stark requires, including occasionally taking out the trash.
But don't worry, because Tony definitely doesn't have feelings for this assistant. It's totally platonic. Nothing going on here.
It's your birthday.
Yes.
I knew that. Already?
Yeah, isn't that strange? It's the same day as last year.
Well, get yourself something nice for me.
I already did.
So then Tony goes to a weapons test in Afghanistan. You see where this is going. Then he drops some hard lines.
Say the best weapon is when you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far. For your consideration, the Jericho.
We're put a boot in your mouth. That's the American way. And then he sells a lot of weapons. So then flash forward to after the explosion from the beginning of the movie, and now Tony's got a big metal thing in his chest, and it's hooked up to a car battery, and he's like, what? But then he finds out it's a magnet in his chest that's keeping the shrapnel from entering his heart, so he's like, oh, okay. So it turns out Tony was captured by this group called the 10 Rings, and these guys have a bunch of Tony's weapons, and we don't know how the heck they got them. So then Tony meets the bad guy, and the bad guys are like, Tony, build me my missile. But he doesn't speak English, so he's got this cool guy named Yinsid to translate for him. And at first, Tony's like, no, I'm not building you a missile. No, you're evil. But then they torture him, and he's like, okay, fine. Jeez. So then later, he's talking to Yinsid, which, by the way, Yinsid is the guy who built Tony's magnet, saved his life. Turns out Yinsid is, it's like super chill.
Your life's work in the hands of those murderers. Is this the last act of defiance of the great Tony Stark? Or are you going to do something about it?
Setting up some great themes of legacy early on. And Tony's like, bro, this magnet sucks. I'm going to build a better one. And this one's also going to be a battery. And then Yinsid is like, whoa, that's a cool battery. And then Tony's like, yeah, I just decided to build a robot suit with it. I just decided. So then they start building this cool robot suit. And the bad guys don't know anything because they're too stupid. And then he walks up and he checks. Yeah, they're doing science. Yeah, that's good. I see science. Nah, you're figuring it out. It doesn't look very missile shaped. Definitely not missile shaped. But then it turns out that last guy wasn't even the real bad guy. This real bad guy is the real bad guy, and you can tell because he's bald. So he comes in and he's like, these guys may not know what a missile looks like, but I do. And these robot parts aren't missile shaped, so make me my missile, Tony. And then he just leaves them unsupervised once again. So Tony immediately goes back to finishing the robot suit, and then the bad guys get really suspicious this time, and they start coming to check on him. Wait, is that Tom Morello? I forgot he was in this. But then it's 2008, so they have to finish downloading Soulja Boy's new album from LimeWire. But then they're running out of time, so Yinsid goes to sacrifice himself, and then Tony comes out and is like, boom, boom, boom. But then Yinsid is like, ugh, I'm dying, man.
Come on, you can go see your family, get up. My family's dead. I'm going to see them now, stop.
Yinsid, no. They'll pay for this. So then Tony comes out of the cave and he's all like, and then he blows them all up and he flies off. And it's really cool. So then Tony gets rescued and he comes back and he's like, I want cheeseburgers, Mom. And then he's also like, let's call a press conference. And at the press conference, we meet Phil Coulson, who'll be really important later, but not today. And then Tony's like, I get hit by a missile and it hurt, so I don't like missiles anymore. Also, terrorists may have been buying our weapons under the table. I'm not really sure. So then he says Stark Industries isn't going to be making weapons anymore. And everyone's like, Tony, come on, my missile. So then he meets with Obadiah, and Obadiah is like, hey man, that sucked. Our business is gonna fail now. Also, show me that really cool battery. I heard cool things about this battery. I really want to see it. But then it turns out Tony's battery actually sucks, so he builds a new one, and he has to get his assistant to change it out for him.
It's not us.
Then he's like, hey, throw this old battery away. It's stupid and I hate it, and I definitely won't need it to beat the bad guy in the third act of the movie. So now Tony has an even newer battery and a lot of time on his hands. So he's like, I'm going to build another cooler, better robot because the last one was cool, but this one's going to be better. Meanwhile, Obadiah comes visit and gives him a pizza and starts talking about Tony's legacy, and then asks him one more time, hey, let me see that cool battery one more time. But Tony's like, no. So then he takes the pizza back. So then Tony does a flight test and he's like crashing in and everything, and he's like, come on, Tony, it's not going to be that easy. You think you can just fly a robot suit right away? And then immediately in the next scene, he's like, okay, let's go fly it above the city, hundreds of miles above the city. And then his robot butler Jarvis is like, please do not do this. So then he goes flying around and he goes way too high and he starts to freeze and he almost dies. But then he's okay. He doesn't die. He lands on his car and we're like, oh Tony, you silly Tony. Then he paints his robot suit red and he goes to a fancy party and he dances with his hot assistant. But then he bails because he finds out at the party that his weapons are still being made and sold somehow, even though he tried to stop it. And then on the way out of the party, we find out that Obadiah is actually the real bad guy. And you can tell because he's bald. And it turns out that he actually wants to take over Wayne Enterprises. Stark Industries. So now Tony's ticked off because he's watching the news and he sees all these little boys in Afghanistan, and the little boys are like, Superman, help me. And Tony's like, hey, I built a robot suit. I can fly it over there. So that's what he does. And then when he gets there, it's really cool. And he's like, No, but seriously, that's like such an iconic sound effect. So Tony blows up the whole tank and he does this cool pose and he's like, got a blast, and he flies off. But then Snow Dogs is with the army guys and they're all like, who authorized this attack? So then Snow Dogs calls Tony and he's like, hey, didn't you forget that I'm also in this movie? And Tony's all like, hey, please don't shoot. It's me. I'm in the robot suit. I wanted to go play Superman. And they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. Meanwhile, we see the two bald bad guys have been working together the whole time. And it turns out Obadiah is the one that put the hit on Tony in the first place from the beginning of the movie. And then Obadiah is like, turns out I'm the realest bad guy of all. And he double crosses the other bald bad guy. But we already knew that was going to happen, so it's not really that surprising. But he does have this cool stick that like makes people paralyzed. And I guess he could have just killed him, but then he wouldn't be able to give his cool bad guy speech. So then we go back home and Pepper's like, hey, I know you've been sneaking out to be a robot superhero and I'm going to quit. And Tony's like, no, you're not. And she's like, okay, fine. So now she goes and tries to find out what's happening to all these weapons. Why are they still getting sold? So she goes to Obadiah's office and uses his computer. And luckily, he's got all his evil bad guy documents in the same place. So she gets a flash drive and she sticks it all on the flash drive. And she's downloading it all to flash drive. But then Obadiah shows up and he's like, oh, and he almost catches her. But then she's like, and she gets out of there real fast. So now Obadiah is pissed and he wants to go use his robot suit, but he never got his battery he's been complaining about the whole movie. So then he goes to his science guy and he's like, hey nerd, where's my battery? And the science guy's like, dude, I can't build this. I'm not Tony Stark. So then Obadiah somehow teleports to Malibu in the next scene and he sneaks up on Tony in his own house and he's like, haha, gotcha. Now I finally have my own battery. I'm taking yours. And then he talks about Tony's legacy again. That must be important. And then he leaves and I guess he could have just killed Tony instead of using the thing, but then he wouldn't have given a cool bad guy speech. Also, is just Jarvis just watching this whole thing like happen? Jarvis didn't want to call anybody. So since Tony's not actually dead yet, he crawls down to his basement and grabs the battery that Pepper saved from earlier in the movie. And it's a cool moment and everyone likes it. So then Rhodey comes back and is all like, Tony, by the way, there's some bad stuff going on. You got to go save Pepper. And also, I'm not the guy from Snow Dogs. So now Phil Coulson's back and he helps Pepper break into the lab. And Obadiah goes to put on his cool new robot suit that he built.
Why is he running like that?
And now it's time for the final battle, Act 3. So Tony goes suit up to save the day.
Do you need me to do anything else?
Keep the skies clear.
Next time, baby.
But then Obadiah has his new suit and he made it even bigger and even better and cooler. And then Obadiah just starts smashing everything and he tries to shoot Pepper in the face with a giant gun. And then Tony comes in and he's like, blammo. And then Obadiah's like throwing cars full of children around and just like just being a real bad guy.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Wow.
So Tony comes up with a plan to fly away so that no one gets hurt. So Obadiah follows him. But then he goes way up high, just like he did earlier in the movie. And he does the ice trick.
How'd you solve the icing problem?
Icing problem.
Confetti cake.
Got him!
And then that's it. Tony wins and everything's good. And turns out he's still alive and he didn't die at all. He wasn't even hurt, really. But then Tony has one more trick because they're fighting on the roof. And there's a big giant battery on the roof. And it all comes back to batteries, guys. It's all about the batteries. So then he tells Pepper, go press some of the science buttons and we're going to blow this battery sky high.
Well, I don't see so good, so I missed.
So then Pepper goes and then she turns on all the science buttons and Obadiah totally gets fried. But in classic Marvel fashion, it just blows Tony to safety. So then Obadiah for real this time. The real for real bad guy is gone and Tony saved the day. So now it's the next day or whenever, and Tony's going to make another press conference. And Phil Coulson is like super involved now. He's like, guys, I'm a main character in this movie as well. And Tony, you need to read this speech. And Tony's like, yeah, I'll read the speech. Yeah. And then he tries one last time to rizz up Pepper. But she's like, nope, not till the sequel, Tony. And now we're in the last scene of the movie. And at the press conference, Tony does this.
I am Iron Man.
And mic drop. So yeah, that's Iron Man. I actually have memories of being shocked when I saw this ending. Superheroes are synonymous with secret identities. It always felt like you needed to have one. So to see Tony just drop the casual, I am Iron Man, it was revolutionary. Like,
He can do that?
but it fits his character so well. Tony is literally the biggest peacock superhero. You know what the difference between Iron Man and Batman is?
Presentation!
Both rich genius orphans with tragic backstories and no superpowers. These characters make themselves superheroes. Not only by their actions, but quite literally by using their brains to build weapons, armor, and gadgets. But Tony's ego will simply not allow him to have a secret identity. Batman's whole thing is protecting your loved ones.
Wear a mask.
I'm not afraid to be seen standing up to these guys.
The mask's not for you. It's to protect the people you care about.
But Tony's more like that drunk guy at the party that would rather say, "Oh yeah, I'd like to see you try it."
Come on, let's go! I'm right here!
And invite his enemies to just square up. No, actually, that happens in the next movie.
And on the off chance you're a man, here's my home address. I'll leave the door unlocked.
Establishing Tony's character is one of the best things that this movie does right. Sure, he's a little broken and lonely at first, but only on the inside. Yensid really said it best.
So you're a man who has everything. And nothing.
So instead of most origin stories where we find a loser who has nothing, we find a billionaire playboy who has everything. But then he kind of has his own Spider-Man moment. He realizes he has a responsibility to do real good in the world. And he promises Yensid that he won't waste his life or his legacy. What's amazing is that this sets up his character arc not only for the rest of the movie, but for the rest of every movie. He has a small moment of growth, sure, but he still has a long way to go, and this is only the start. So now let's grade this movie, shall we? I already said character development was probably the highlight of the movie. We leave knowing exactly who Tony is, how he thinks, and his relationship with other characters. Another thing this movie does really well, it sets the template for the MCU. This movie has a lot of heart. Early 2000s superhero movies were sometimes guilty of trying to look really cool, something I'll coin as the Matrix effect. I mean, just look at the costumes of the X-Men versus how they look in the movie. A lot of films kind of felt like they were going for action first and story second. It's like every movie had the aesthetic of a Linkin Park music video. But Iron Man was kind of a cultural shift to less edgy and more fun. It does a great job of not dating itself in that way. Seriously, this movie holds up. The costumes they wear, the jokes they make, the CGI, and even the soundtrack. They didn't lean into anything too much that makes the movie feel like it was made in 2008. Does Iron Man have a revolutionary plot and an amazing twist? Absolutely not. In fact, it's a little predictable. But it's a fun, character-driven story where the good guy learns a lesson, beats the bad guy, and gets the girl. Oh wait, yeah, he actually doesn't do that. In fact, that kind of helps modernize the movie even more. The romance in this movie is there, but it takes a back seat and it never really lands, which was honestly refreshing at that time. So Iron Man, I'm giving an A. Not an A+, but a solid A. For changing the landscape of superhero movies going forward. And is it worth the rewatch? Definitely. But there's still one more thing we haven't talked about yet, and it might be the most important part of the whole movie. Before we get there, I should mention a few things. One, thanks again so much for watching this video. I'm starting this series because I love rewatching things. In fact, I used to have a tradition that every time a new MC movie would come out, then I would rewatch all of the old ones. But the list eventually became way too big, and now watching the whole MCU kind of feels like a big project. So I figured I'd try something I've never done before. I've always been a fan of video essays like this style, so I figured I'd give it a try. I plan on keeping this series going and watching through the entire MCU, but I should mention, I do have a job and a wife and a kid. So I'm doing the most YouTuber thing I could do, and I'm setting up a Patreon.
Give me money. Money me. Money now. Me a money needing a lot now.
If you're even a little bit interested, consider supporting me so that I can hopefully start making these videos faster and make even more of them. The link is in the description. If not, then you can always just drop a like and a follow on the video because those are free. Now, maybe for the final and most important part of this movie.
Jarvis.
Welcome home, son.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? Who the hell are you? Nick Fury. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
Ah, the good old post-credit scene. This certainly wasn't the first movie to do one, but it was the most important. Samuel L. Jackson casually showing up as Nick Fury and name-dropping the Avengers Project. It was wild. It was like hitting the nerd jackpot. Of course, like I said, I was more of a Justice League guy, but even I remember being excited at the idea of this crossover event. I mean, who doesn't love a good crossover? And this post-credit scene was the first one to kick off the big MCU post-credit scene trend, a trend that eventually spilled into literally every movie ever made. Now when you go watch any movie, you stick around just so you don't miss anything. And Iron Man's is just so iconic. To this day, we're still getting the blank blank is appearing in Avengers Doomsday memes. So with that final touch, Iron Man cemented itself, not just as an amazing superhero movie, but as a certified classic. It kicked off the MCU with a bang and created a character so iconic that the company had to bring back the actor just to help save the franchise. This has been Captain Rewatch. Thanks for Doomsday Prepping.